Welcome, everybody, to Motherhood, Raw, Full But True, with me, your host, Rainbow Goddess. This podcast offers candid portrayals of the reality of mothering in a Western, individualistic, patriarchal culture. So welcome, everybody, to another episode of Motherhood, Raw, Full But True, with me, your host, Rainbow Goddess. And today I'm interviewing Mhairi. Is that how I pronounce it?
Sorry, but it's not. It's Mhairi. So it sounds,
Mhairi.
looks like Mhairi, but it sounds like Mhairi.
Mhairi is a mother scholar. And this term is emerging with this matricentric feminism. And it just basically means a woman who's a mother and also an academic. And Mhairi's just completed her PhD. It took her 7 years. During that time, she's raised 2 children. Her daughter was 1. She started this PhD. Then she had another child. So now she's got 2 kids, 5 and 8. Just finished the PhD. And before we came on, she was saying, I've been a hermit for 7 years, sat in my kitchen typing. And now all these people are offering me jobs and I'm going to conferences and their life is kicking off. So it's really beautiful to have you here, Mhairi. I am, close, following in your footsteps, really inspired by you. And I can't wait to hear about your research and about your journey.
Thank you so much.
Your journey of
here with you and to finally get to meet after all this time.
Yeah. So you're going to share with us your experiences as a working class lone mum and what that background meant for you as a PhD student and now as a researcher. Before we dip deeper into the mix of Mhairi's matrisense and academic life, let's give you some space, Mhairi, to introduce yourself and contextualize that background for us.
Thanks, both. So first up, thanks for having me on the show. It's such a pleasure to be here. Just to share a bit about who I am and where I come from, I suppose. My name's Mhairi Ross, and I'm a working class researcher, and I was brought up by my mum as the youngest of 5. My mum was a lone parent herself. My dad died when I was 6 months old, and she was left with the 5 of us. So my family moved about. We moved about a lot, and we moved to several of I suppose, Scotland's most persistently deprived housing schemes. We lived for a while in Easterhouse, which is the area that I ended up writing about in my PhD. Also in Craigmillar in Edinburgh, and then I spent quite a large part of my childhood in a scheme in the far north of Scotland called Ballantor, which was really different. It was a rural place. So my mum was she was everything for me growing up, but my mum was balancing an awful lot of strain and a lot of issues of her own. She was dealing with a lot of the problems that my older siblings were having, dealing with trauma. And we were also on a really, really low income for really pretty much all of my childhood until my mum eventually became physically disabled when I was about 10. And it wasn't until that point where my mum actually ended up getting disability benefits for the first time that our income actually became a bit higher, because prior to that, we'd been really living in the breadline. Our electricity meters would run out. We often didn't have enough to eat. And we were really at the extreme end of poverty in the first part of my childhood before my mum's disability kicked in. So I experienced firsthand what it was like to live through quite chaotic personal circumstances in my young life. There was mental health struggles within my family. Lots of those. There was undiagnosed special educational needs within the family. my older sibling was in prison for a good deal of my childhood, and there was a huge amount going on. So as a young person, I was aware of the strain that there was there upon my mum and the amount of stress that she experienced as she tried to hold this family together and move through all these different struggles and issues that were going on for her 5 children. And that made a huge impression on me. And watching my mum navigate all of that and come through it with such dignity, and such kindness and empathy for other people around her in the world was really what was the big imprint. It was like a big stamp that was stamped on to my soul, and I took it with me
Mm,
to
mm.
experience with me through all my early adulthood. And when I eventually became a mum, that stamp, that imprint of how you cope and how you manage and keep going through really the toughest of times, um, was there for me. And
Oh,
during my own really tough times, when my own relationship of 15 years fell apart during the coronavirus pandemic in really pretty traumatic circumstances that I won't go into too much. And during the time when I was left on my own with a brand new baby of 3 months old and a toddler, and I had to go to live in an off-grid cabin with no electricity in the middle of the woods and bring them up for a year with no other people around because of the pandemic. During all of that stuff that I struggled through, that big imprint of how you keep going and how you manage was printed onto my soul. And I remembered how you do it. So it was all these
wow.
things, these experiences were kind of what brought me to my research. So my research looked at the experiences of a group of older women who had experience of lone motherhood in this neighbourhood called Easterhouse in Glasgow, which is a neighbourhood where my family lived for over 10 years. And Easterhouse in Glasgow is one of the most persistently deprived places in Europe since the 1970s.
Wow.
And
Wow.
it's also a place where there's been an incredibly high incidence of lone motherhooded households, which have the lone motherhood exploded in Easterhouse through the 1980s and then continued to be really, really high throughout the ensuing 40 years. So
Can you just define what you mean by lawn mothers? Because we did do a podcast on lawn mothers, single mothers, and solo mothers. So
yeah,
can you tell us what you mean by lawn mother?
yeah, that's a really important differential actually, both. So within the context of my study and within my definition of lone motherhood, and what I mean by that is a role of motherhood where the substantive role of motherhood is borne by mother alone. So the substantial burden of care, of emotional, physical, financial labor is borne by the mothers alone. So that's what. So the women in Easterhouse that I was interested in interviewing and finding out about were women who substantially mothered alone and bore that whole burden of care. And my
Was
research,
that due to was that due to being widowed, or was that due to the father's leaving and not coming back?
well, that's actually a really interesting question. That was one of the major surprises, actually, of my research. Was that what I discovered when I went out to interview these women who were aged between 55 and 80. So they were older women that were of the same generation as my own mother. And what I've discovered was, as a surprise, every single woman that I went out to interview had entered into lone motherhood as a result of domestic abuse. So I felt this tremendous culture of violence against women in this particular
Mm.
neighbourhood of Glasgow, um, where the majority of women were telling me it happened in all the houses, and the level of violence against women that was uncovered was extreme. Um, and women that entered into lone motherhood, particularly at that time through the 1980s, did so because they simply had no option to stay in heterosexual relationships. It was a really, really challenging place to be a woman on your own. It was an ultra violent neighborhood and incredibly high levels of crime. So it was a very, very challenging place to be a woman alone. And those who chose to go alone generally did it because they were fleeing very dangerous and violent situations. So anyway, I've
Of
digressed a
course
little.
not. I mean, tell me if this is another digression, but you know, I'm like all about community
Yeah,
and the
yeah.
village. We don't need a village to raise a child. No, child is okay if mum's okay. We need the village to raise the mother. And so I love this idea of connection. And I was just imagining, like, I grew up in a council estate, and you know, the woman down the road was called Auntie Anne, and there was so much connection around. Even though I lived in, I mean, it wasn't as rough as Easter Island, is it? Easter,
Easter, that's amazing. Easter Island's what my hat's called. But no,
is
Easterhouse is
it?
the name of the
Easter
neighborhood.
House.
Yeah, yeah.
So but I know I can get it, these deprived areas, you know, I can understand it and empathize because I saw it. But there was a connection in them really low socioeconomic areas. There was connection. So I'm just wondering how are the women were the women together? Did they get together? Did they find solidarity?
Well, that's exactly what my research was about. Well, that was what my research questions were all about. So my work looked into the significance of female networks of support and solidarity. So it was about the extent to which women supported each other and helped each other to get by and get on through challenges of place. So of living in Easterhouse, poverty, of gender, being a woman, and in this context, facing domestic abuse, and of lone motherhood. So it was about how women helped each other to navigate all of these different circumstances. And it's actually that whole topic is stuff that I'm putting into publication at the moment. I've got it's about 3 different publications about the significance of female solidarity on the go at the moment that are currently in process. I'm not going to talk too much just at this minute about what I discovered about the significance of female solidarity because it's kind of all ready to get put into paper just right now. Um, but it was,
I'll be citing you though, won't I? Dr.
it was,
Ross. I'll be citing you in my work, won't I?
oh, I do hope
Dr.
so.
Ross, reading it all,
I
getting
do,
all the quotes nice and, you know, framing it,
I do
anchoring
hope,
on like we do, building. I
I
love
do hope.
it.
No, like, but what was really, really interesting about that piece of research was that so I told you a bit about my early days and about how my experience of growing up with my mum really was for the catalyst for wanting me to go and study this topic and really to try and step inside the past and understand, what life had been like for women of my mum's generation and the kinds of struggles that working class women in the neighbourhoods where my mum had lived, what they experienced and how that had shaped the way that families come together and entangle and fall apart, as was the case in my family. I wanted to find out how the political paradigms, and how socio-economic circumstances had shaped not only women's lives of my mum's generation, but also our family lives, also about myself, my siblings, and all of those other people around me in these council estates, how what happened to women impacted all of us and continues to do so. So what was interesting was that the point. So when I started off the PhD, I think you said my oldest was a year at that time. That's not quite right. When I first started writing my proposal, my oldest daughter was she was about 4 months old, and
Oh,
I was still in a relationship at that time with my partner of I think we were together almost 15 years. Um, but it wasn't until the second year of my PhD where I'd got pregnant with my second child and took a year off for maternity leave which was followed by the global pandemic. It wasn't until that point when my second child was born that in the middle of writing this piece about lone motherhood, which I thought was about trying to understand my mother's experience, then I too became a lone mother in the middle of it all, writing a story about lone motherhood. So it started to add all these new layers of depth into the piece that I was writing, because now I wasn't only the child of a lone mother headed household. Now I was actually the lone mother, the lone mother also in the middle of all this. So
Wow.
I was forced to take 2 years off, which is why the thing took me 7 years to write. I had a year off from the birth of my second child. And then I had a further year off where I couldn't go out to interview women in their homes, older women especially, because of coronavirus and the pandemic. So it wasn't until the period, as soon as coronavirus was over, I was out there. I was back in Easterhouse recruiting women to speak to in all the community groups and in the churches and on the streets and in the supermarket. Trying to find women who were within this right age group to have mothered through the 80s and 90s. So I was there, but it was such an interesting time to go out to speak to older women, um, because so many had been, we'd all been cooped up in our homes, right, in this period,
Mm,
through COVID. But many older women had been incredibly isolated and
mm,
separated from their usual networks of support. So people were desperate to talk. It was such a good time
yeah.
at Easter. The older women that I met were desperate to tell their stories. Another thing that was actually quite a sobering and sad part of that is the Easterhouse was particularly hard hit by the coronavirus death rate. It was 3 times higher in Easterhouse than it was in some more prosperous parts of Glasgow. So many people had
Oh,
lost family members there through COVID, and there's a lot of people that wanted to talk and that needed somebody there to talk and were keen to share of their lives because life seemed so delicate and fragile at that time. And people were really keen to be involved in this kind of life course research that I was doing, where they were getting to talk about different stages of their adult life course. So I was going out and I was interviewing women in 3 stages. I was finding out about their young part of their adult life, possibly where they'd been bringing up young children. I was finding out about midlife, and later on I would go out and I would interview women about their later life course stages. One of the things that really surprised me, which I wasn't expecting at all, despite the fact that I've been a community worker and I've been used to going out and having good conversations with people in communities for over 20 years, I wasn't prepared for how quickly and how frankly older women would begin to want to tell me about their sex lives. I'd be like 15 minutes, and all of a sudden people were pouring out all kinds of stories about the things that had happened to them and different men that they'd been with and different relationships, all these different things. So it was fascinating in many ways, but quite apart from not being quite prepared for that. Um, Something that I quickly discovered that I will talk about from the research was what became really apparent was that, the sexual revolution that we all know about that was happening in the swinging 60s in other parts of the UK, more prosperous parts of the UK, was not evident at all for women in these really cut off, socially segregated housing estates in Scotland. It didn't exist. There was women telling me that, but first of all, there was this expectation that if you were pregnant, if you fell pregnant, that you would get married. That was a given. You must marry still in the 1980s. If you were pregnant,
wow.
you lived in these places. In Easterhouse, I was told that women, that at least half of my participant group were still refused contraception in the 1980s, where despite experiencing poverty and wanting to reduce their family size, doctors were turning them away for contraception. Domestic abuse in marriage was still considered a norm for women in the neighborhoods. So women's rights were like decades behind what you might have expected
God.
here in the UK, in Easterhouse. So, and
Oh, bless them.
those kinds of learnings, I suppose, were the kinds of things that were coming out from these conversations that at times were humorous and really quite funny, where women were talking about relationships with men and sex and different things that came up. I was learning so much as I went along as well. So yeah, those
How
things.
beautiful for you too to have such intergenerational conversations like that, and it being about your heritage, like it's really beautiful. I used to work in a nursing home when I first did like aromatherapy and had this contract and I charged them nothing. So they could all afford it, but I got to do a lot in one day, so it weren't too bad. But the best part of it was the stories, what
Mm.
they tell, just, absorbing that wisdom and that presence. I used to go and visit my great grandma at Wales from school sometimes and just ask her to tell me stories from our past, you know? So what a beautiful thing. You sat
That
with the
was
old dears.
that was one of my that was one of the things actually that I'm most proud of to date with the PhD was that back in October, just past year, I was able to hold an event at the Glasgow Women's Library, and the event was attended by about 60 of the women and their families who took part in the study.
Wow.
So women came along with their daughters and granddaughters and some male family members too, but mainly with other women to this event. And France of the interviews were donated to the archive of the Glasgow Women's Library as a record of this group of women's struggles because they'd never been written about before. Working class women,
Wow.
own motherhood in Glasgow's never been recorded before. So their stories
Wow.
became part of the archive. And during that time, there was discussion and there was art, there was crafts activities. And what was coming through from granddaughters and from daughters was, wow, we never knew anything about the fact that our granny had lived through these tremendous domestic abuse situations that came out the other side. We didn't know about the addictions that people were struggling through. We didn't know the extent of the poverty and what that was like for women. And it was this transformational educational experience where all these light bulbs were going off across the generations about how much struggle, how extreme the struggle had been for previous generations of working class women and a lot of the sacrifices that the previous generation have had to make to help us to get the small creeping steps towards freedom that we continue to take.
Yeah. Plus a bit to them, to our ancestors. May we all have the time and grace and be blessed enough to sit with our grandmothers and ask them to tell us stories. Just the awareness of it, because we talk about in transpersonal psychology, intergenerational trauma, and now when we do healing in our life, we send it back 7 generations and forward 7 generations.
Mm.
Well, you can't do that if you're not aware of things. And I think just dropping into the awareness through the story of the past, of your lineage, your bloodline, that in itself, could be just a really healing thing, just to have that awareness of what happened, and it's generational healing modality,
It was
storytelling
definitely,
and being truthful.
I think that's one of the things that makes me feel really glad about the research board because something that was a huge worry for me before setting off in this particular piece of research was the worry that this could be perceived as some kind of poverty safari. So often eh,
Mm.
writers and other types of industries come in into neighborhoods and places where there's entrenched and deep poverty and they benefit and make money from writing about it and putting in interventions where they profit from poverty really. And that's what I really that was the opposite. I just wanted to shy away from anything that would be about me building my reputation upon the struggles of others. But what was really, really made my heart glad about this process was that it was an exercise in consciousness raising. During the interviews, numerous women named abuse for the first time. Numerous women didn't know what they'd experienced was abuse. They found names. Older women that had never had the language to name these different injustices found names and found consciousness that what had happened to them was oppressive and was wrong. Several people sought support and help through it. And also later on in activities like the Glasgow Women's Library Day, generations came together and learned together about the struggles of the past and about historical injustices and what it meant for us all. So not only did I benefit from that, because I benefited from learning about the past and the times of my mother and how that imprint that she gave me, what it means. It was like reading the imprint, the stamp, and it was a symbol that I didn't really understand. And then eventually, after doing the piece of research, I was able to look and understand what it all mean. It was like a key for me to understanding my past. But what was really beautiful for me was then I got to watch other people and their families experience that too through that piece of work. So that was something that was incredibly special for me about the PhD. It wasn't just a random piece of study. It wasn't just an opportunity to further my educational attainment. It wasn't really about wanting to call myself Dr. Ross, although I'm glad that I can now.
As
It,
in,
it was really about me trying to make sense of my quite muddled and jumbled path and actually managing to do that through a piece of academic study.
beautiful, Mama. It's amazing. It's really, really incredible. I love this epoch what we're in now, where we're over materialism and it's about subjectivity. The focus is coming back, I think, to the heart of the matter, and hopefully from there, things can shift. Things can shift, and the more we get these stories out there, the more healing can happen, and the more we can all, work out what's best moving forward to really bring about systemic change for mothers, in all kinds of demographics, because there's issues all over. Isn't there? There's issues all over. Poor mothers, black mothers, queer mothers, lone mothers, mothers who are married. There's just, all these different cross-cultural as well situations of motherhood where they've got the different oppressions, different marginalizations, different stigmas, and if the world can just realize, like, man, these are the nurturers of the next wave of humans that are going to be living on this planet, leading on this planet, loving on this planet, shaping the next wave for the next generation after them. We can look after them properly, help
Mm.
them. What could we do in one generation if we could do that? So I'm just really deeply emotional saying that and honoring you so deeply, because what it's took for you, I mean, you not come from privilege. You ain't got no one, you know, helping you, like a lot of people who get to do PhDs. And like what you've just said, so meaningful and so necessary.
I think I think that's
To
what
have managed that,
I think
like
that's
raise the kids on your own. Poof,
I think that's one of the things
Mary.
made proudest was that you know, you're right. There was nobody. There just was nobody. When I went out to recruit my kid, I had the pushchair with me and a toddler, and they had to come with me to all these different places because there was nobody that could look after them. At that point, the only time that the writing got done was after they went to sleep and I was exhausted, and 9 o'clock till 1 in the morning shift. That was my writing time. That makes me proud. But they watched all that. My little girl, especially, who's turning 8 this year, she watched what that was, and I can see that she's internalized it all, and she's learned. And I'm grateful to kids because if it wasn't for them and becoming a mum, I would never have set out on this incredible learning journey that I've been on. And also, I'm really, really super, super grateful to the other mothers because at the point when I became a mum, my world dropped away. My safe relationship of 15 years totally crumbled and fell apart. And I was left literally holding two tiny babies in the middle of a pandemic. But it was this circle of women and especially mothers, the women of Easterhouse came together and they saw me standing on those streets with a buggy and with a toddler. And nearly all of them told me the reason that they agreed to take part when they found out what I was doing was that they wanted to try to help a fellow working class lone mum to get on, to do better,
Yeah.
to find the way ahead because they knew what it is to struggle and what it is to try to make better for yourself. So it was about female solidarity. It was there, you know, they, as much as I was raising their untold story, they hugely helped me out. My participants became my network of solidarity, as well as a few other really key women who were my wing women. It's a beautiful thing.
Wow. Wow, Maddie, it's amazing. Amazing. What a woman.
Mhm.
What research. What an impact. What a new chapter now. Come on, Dr. Ross.
Thank
I'm
you.
your biggest fan. I'm your
Thank you
biggest
so
fan.
much. I'm your biggest fan too, and I can't
So,
wait to meet you there.
so let's switch a little bit now and focus on you as a mother who's doing a
Mhm.
PhD, not a researcher who's looking at motherhood.
Yeah.
And yeah, coming to these experiences as a working class mom and what it meant for you. Yeah, tell us a bit more about that internal journey.
I think the first part of the internal journey, I'm just making a couple of notes here as we chat, just because my
Of course,
fo-
Dr. Ross.
foggy 9 o'clock, 9:30 at night brain sometimes forgets things. So, so I think the biggest thing that I learned, because as you know, my wee ones were very, very small when I started this thing. I had new babies and a tiny toddler. My children were tiny. And what I learned early on, quite apart from being a working class mum, just being a mum who was trying to undertake a major piece of work with two tiny people, was that I had to learn really, really quickly how to manage energy. It was like an energy equation that I was constantly doing in my head whilst my children were tiny. It was like as tiny as the smallest details about what I would eat. Like, is that going to give me enough energy to get to this next little bit? When they're going to sleep, it was like all these calculations of how much sleep, how much of what kind of food might I need to help me to be able to get these wee blocks of looking after them, then writing this thing and being able to stay alert enough. So a huge amount of what preoccupied me in their early life was just simply about managing my physical and mental and emotional energy. And I would go out of my way to avoid stuff that was going to in any way put any extra strain or drain onto whatever reserves of emotional or physical energy I had, because I was totally tuned in to just wanting to complete this task of doing a PhD and also do the best job I could of looking after my little ones. And I suppose that just extends on being a working class mum and a researcher. For me, it's about modeling to my kids. It's about modeling finding better ways. And it's about modeling being the change that you want to see. in the world. That's what I want to model and I want to bring to our family life is the hopefulness that better ways are possible for us all and that we're not stuck, that this world's not stuck in a place of despair and that we can do incredible things. We can do incredible things. In fact, that was a card that myself and my wee girl made at Christmas time. We've got it on our mantelpiece. Um, and it's about all these barriers and structural and systemic inequalities. And I know there are many, many things that and barriers and um, hoops and hurdles that prevent people from being able to reach their full potential. Totally, totally that we're not all at a level playing field and the world is not fair and there are many injustices and everybody can't have access to the opportunities that they should. But in terms of our wee family and the kinds of values that I'm hope to model to my two wee tiny flatmates that are asleep in their beds right now, um, is that change is possible, and we must identify what drives us, and we must identify mm, where we see injustice and think carefully about what we're going to do about it because we can make change.
Dr. Ross, I love that.
Yeah,
Find what did you say? Find what drives you and the injustices,
and
and then what you're
identify
gonna do about it.
that. Yeah, um, and I think as well a lot of um, for me, my approach in a lot of ways is simply it's not really been all that complex. I think tenacity is really important to me, and a lot of what I've done is just keep pushing on different doors. You know, I've just kept pushing
Mm.
different types of doors to see which ones would open, and I think that's a big part of being a working class researcher as well, is that we don't necessarily have all these networks and stepping stones of privilege that others might have, which naturally lead them into positions and workplaces and opportunities. And for people like me, anyhow, and for many other working class workers and researchers, I think often it's just about keeping pushing on those different doors and trying different ones, and eventually they do open, I think. To being tenacious.
Certainly what's, been the case for me, Barry. Well, what you've just said. Yeah. Not to give up. Not to give up. Just keep going, keep going. Yeah.
I do hope
Get
so,
there in
but
the end.
do you know what I'm
Take you
thinking?
a bit longer than someone that's got loads of money, right? Take you a bit longer than someone who's got loads of money. Take you a bit longer than someone that's not had loads of trauma in the childhood. Take you a
Mm,
bit longer than someone who's grown up with two loving parents, supporting them, boosting their esteem, who's got a little nest egg, who can, like, oh, pay for your first year's fees. Go on while you get started. These little things. Oh, I'll pay for your car insurance this year. Those tiny little things make such a difference, don't they? They're privileges. So
mm.
yeah, they help. But
Do you know,
you can do it.
do you know one
You've
of the
done it, and you kid. You've done it with two kids on your own, little kids and all, in COVID. Wow, you've done
one
it. You've done it. You made it through the wilderness. Go on, Dr. Ross.
thank you,
You
my darling.
deserve it. You've earned it.
One of the things
Mhm.
that really, really made me happy was my graduation was in December, so just about a month ago or so, they're up in Glasgow, and I travelled up with the two kids on the train from my home where I live now. And it was kind of odd because I was looking around me and I was seeing that there was lots of other families there and lots of other people's mums and dads were there and partners and people were getting ready to go out for meals together. And our setup was so different. It was just me and my wee tiny flatmate. there. And we were doing something totally different, but it was the right setup for this whole big journey that I'd been on that was about lone motherhood. I was like, it's just about, this is about us. This is what this experience is. But at the end of it, Glasgow Uni's got this really fancy and impressive area called the Cloisters, which is a bit like Harry Potter um, world up there. So anyway, there was a kind
Wow.
of a champagne reception after the graduation where there was lots of professors and people wafting about. We drank, and my little girl Bella Jean ended up with a PhD graduation suit on, running about. And she was like going up to people and introducing herself and going, "Hello, I'm Dr. Ross. How do you do?" And like shaking their hand. And I was like, "Hello there." The empowering
Um,
experience that I was looking for from this
yeah.
PhD. My daughter now is able to visualize herself as Dr. Ross, who has a place at the table in this university academy set up and feels confident to go up to these people and introduce herself in a way that as a 7-year-old girl, I would never, living in a council estate, would have been beyond my wildest dreaming state. Couldn't have imagined that whatsoever. So that was a result for me. I was like, that's a new imprint. The stamp has changed and morphed into a new stamp that we're stamping on to this new generation, which was really, really nice.
Wow. I love it. I love it. Just incredible, Mama. It's so incredible.
Thank you. But
Mm.
so I hope, yeah, I hope that's been a good chat. I hope that's maybe just shone a wee bit of a light on some of the wild experiences that I've been having over the past 7 years, and was a bit about my motivation as well and who I am and why I wanted to do this piece of work about female solidarity.
Can't wait till it's published. Can't wait to read it. Can't wait to read your books, watch your TED Talk, meet you in person, and have some
Thank
fun with our kids, our 5-year-olds.
That would be
Sky's the
lovely.
limit, Mary. Eh?
Come and visit my heart in Scotland. You'll be so welcome.
Oh, yeah, I would love to. Would
Mm.
love to.
Yay.
Is there
Like,
anything else you'd like to say before we end the recording?
I don't know, but just to say thank you, darling, because it's such a privilege to be invited to chat to you and just that I follow your work. And I'm so excited to hear more about your journey as well and where your research goes. And I'll be watching with such interest and cheering you on all the way.
Thank you so much. That really means so much. It really does. Having this connection with a mother scholar and like similar journeys, coming from a council estate. Like I remember being a little girl when sitting in my grandma's house, right? And she said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I said, "A neuroscientist." And she went, "Oh, you need to read way more books." It basically said you're not clever enough. And I really took that in. And so it does, it feels so amazing now to have that validation. Like 21 years I've had this deep calling to do a PhD. And then the motherhood shape, 8 months old, my kid, when we were single, went into temporary accommodation in a really crap area, you know, went through a lot, rehoused, and now I did my master's, started my master's when he was 8 months old when we went through. And then it changed me because I thought I'd do a PhD on indigenous psychedelic practice in
Mhm.
this country, basically reclaim the mushroom priestess as the shaman of the UK. And in the end, because of what I was going through and because of what I was reading, I became this match-centric feminist scholar. And my dissertation was on the meaning of community to single spiritual but not religious mothers. And I was becoming it as I was writing it. And by the end, I'd got some funding to put on a group
Yeah.
because I need spiritual mates because the quality of the secular baby groups was so, I felt like an alien. And actually meeting these women who came to this call when I put it out there, a shamanic mum and toddler group, I knew my kind of women had come to that. And then I made friends and it was outside the toddler group where we started to hang out. And then we were doing organic rituals in the garden with the kids on Sabbaths, and it was just such a different experience to them initial, such isolating, really dark times, you
Mm.
know. And now I'm like you, these opportunities have opened up. Like I've been working so hard to try and follow this calling to fulfill, to break the chain. And interesting, like my mum did teacher training, but my grandma was there all the time. My
Mm.
grandma would come, pick us up from school, she'd do tea, she'd like answer the phone to my boyfriend and say I wouldn't go out with him anymore and he shouldn't ever ring back. My mum were doing a teacher training degree and she
Right.
took me into a university in the summer holidays and I remember mashing a potato. She was doing an experiment on vitamin C in vegetables and how it reduces over time, to get a teacher training
Yeah.
thing. But yeah, so she was my mother academic. So I think I was inspired a bit by her, but she never went on further than that. And she's had a career and worked very, very hard. And I've gone on this like bit of a mystical path and then a bit of an academic path. And anyway, it's landing and it's opening and I'm becoming and like, like yourself, just that hard work, that dedication, that faith in yourself, like that unwavering, like, yeah, I've been dealt a shit hand, but it doesn't define me. I can make my own life and change my life. And now, like up until 2 weeks ago, when before I knew that I were doing it, there was
Yeah.
this sense of uncertainty about the future. Like, what am I going to do? How am I going to afford the future? How am I going to afford his life, my child? How can I afford to raise him? Like what I need to make this work. And now it's happened, and I can imagine buying a camper van. I can imagine buying land. Simple things what people take for granted. Like I can imagine feeling like, oh, I need some winter boots. Let's go and get some from a proper shop. Don't have to trend on Facebook Marketplace. Just that opportunity, that ease that comes with the certainty of financial security. And then also this alignment with purpose. I'm thinking that the thing I've been drawn to, the thing that's been forged through me can actually make a difference. It's like such a win-win. Such
Yeah.
a I feel like I've walked through a magical screen into another life where everything's okay now and my kid's going to be okay now. And I just get to do that thing that I felt in my body and it's revealed itself now, what it actually is. And I just need to carry on. And so
I
I'm
think
just
there
such
was something
alignment and resonance. Go on.
there was something you said that was really interesting there, which was about you know, transforming something that you felt like you'd been dealt a bit of a shit hand. For so many of us, the point where we become lone or single parents is a really low point, right? Where we've got to renegotiate what we thought motherhood was going to be about, and we've got to fight, right,
Yeah.
shit, I'm on now. I'm going to have to do so much of this alone, and it's going to be lonely, and it's a journey that you walk alone. But the really golden part of that for me was the point where I realized I was going to turn the shit situation to my advantage. And all of a sudden, the thing that should have been the really shit thing that happened actually became the bit of gold that sent me on my way, that sent me on the way up. Because I was like, without the whole drama, which led to me becoming a lone parent, none of this good stuff would have happened for me. And also, another really important thing is that, at first when I became a lone parent, I was quite depressed and I felt quite lonely. And that, there's this tendency to go down this really dark place in your head where you think, well, I'll never be with anyone else again. And who's going to want to get with you when you've got kids and baggage and, you've got this past life and it's going to be too hard to ever pick yourself up and start something fresh again. But what I realized is that what I really need at this point in my life is clarity and peace and no other distractions. So the kind of life that I've got right now is the kind of life that I need to be able to do the stuff that I want to do because I don't have time to manage other people's, a relationship or the needs and desires and timetable and activities of another person. I simply don't have space for that. got barely enough space for caring for myself and the children. So there's something really golden about realizing that you get what you need. In the words of the Rolling Stones, you can turn lone motherhood into something golden that can be a piece of alchemy that can take you somewhere amazing, and it can be a state that's really pleasurable and exactly what you want and need if you choose to let it be that.
Mm. Mm. Beautiful, Mama.
Mm, I think so.
Thank you so much, so much. I've got so much out of this. It's so feels so good in my body sharing with you and resonating with you, and yeah, and your work is amazing, and I just can't wait to read it. Really celebrating you and behind you and watching you, and yeah, I can't wait to speak at conferences on motherhood together, and you know, yeah, keep soaring, kid. Blessed be to you and your children, and thank you so much for coming on and
Oh,
sharing.
thank
And
you,
any
guys. Well, thank you so
listeners,
much for having me, Dylan. It was great to meet you, and I know that we will be meeting again really soon.
yeah, yeah. So thank you so much for coming on. Thank you so much, listeners, for tuning in. I've been Rainbow, this has been Mhairi, and we've been Rawful But True. Could you?